but I do believe that we're a strong enough entity and a strong enough team that we will claw back and put ourselves back in the hunt sometime this season. Why was the porpoising so bad in Baku, say relative to Barcelona? Does it vary track by track? Because it looked like in Barcelona you had certainly fixed the issue. There is definitely a track by track element, and it's a function of how smooth the tarmac is and the layout of the circuit. I would say Baku, certainly of the circuits we've had so far, is on the worst end of it, and conversely Barcelona probably on the better end of it. So those two circuits definitely will highlight the strengths and weaknesses of the package. But it's also worth putting a little bit of time into explaining porpoising, bouncing, bottoming. Three words possibly being spoken a lot with a little bit of association of being the same thing, but they're not quite. We definitely suffered porpoising in the earlier races, and in Barcelona we didn't. And we've made a tremendous amount of effort on our package to make sure that we tried our best to resolve it. And I'm confident we've made a step. In Barcelona, the car was stable, robust, and we could lower it. And that's the key is, we managed to create a package where aerodynamically we were able to work with it a lot more, we could work with setup, and we could drop the car in terms of ride height, producing performance. Come now to Monaco and to Baku, what that unfortunately uncovered is a second issue that was being masked by the first. I'm confident we've made a step forward in terms of porpoising, but we very clearly have bouncing. And to the outside, it looks almost identical, but there was a subtle difference between the two. What's happening now is the car is lower as a result of fixing the first issue, but now hitting the deck quite hard. And that's creating the bouncing that you see at the moment. Again, you try and extract performance by running the car low, but the problem's very different. And the bumpier the track, the more the input is clearly having an effect, which is what you saw in Baku. I think what's clear is that we still have a long journey in front of us to learn everything we need to be fighting at the front. But perhaps more importantly, you will, as just suggested by this question, see performance variation track on track as we go forward. Canada for sure will be very different to Silverstone in terms of how our car performs. I'm pleased to report that Lewis is here this morning. I've spent a few hours with him and he's okay. He'll be back in the car in Montreal. He's an elite athlete that will push the bounds of endurance of himself and the car. And that's what Formula One drivers do. That's what makes them exceptional. On this occasion though, we pushed the package and our drivers too far. We are putting them into significant discomfort and we simply can't do that again. Our drivers are not the only ones suffering. You'll see in the media a number of comments from a number of drivers who are equally in discomfort and pain. And we have a responsibility now to make sure that this doesn't carry on. About halfway through the race, Lewis commented that his seat had gone cold. What was that? It's a good question in as much as I didn't have an answer until I spent a few minutes with Lewis earlier to actually ask him. What happened is nothing really had changed in the car. It just looks like after the amount of pummeling his back had taken from the bouncing, he fundamentally had a numbness that set in, and it looks like the cold was a response to that. So there wasn't anything colder in the car, it's just a response to the amount of endurance and pain he'd been through in the race. The car looked to be, relatively speaking, faster in a straight line in Barcelona than it was in Baku. Was that the reason why we weren't competitive? The short answer is no. You're correct in the view that the straight line speeds, it's all relative of course, were different. And to explain that, Barcelona is around a high downforce, high drag therefore wing, and everyone pretty much moves up to that. So we're all in a very similar boat in terms of what rear wing we're running. In Baku, a number of teams opted to go quite light on the rear wing level, lighter than we were expecting them to go. In the case of Alpine and Red Bull, for example, they were probably at the extreme end. They were quite a bit faster in a straight line. Ferrari a little bit faster than ourselves, and then McLaren, AlphaTauri, Williams were around the level that we were. Ultimately, it comes down to a compromise. You can't take rear wing off the car and gain straight line speed without losing in the corners. So here, for example, in Baku, it's around where we were losing the most relative to our two main rivals, Red Bull and Ferrari. And that wasn't on the straights. Actually, a lot of the losses to Ferrari were through the corners, more significantly through the corners. And I'm confident that had we taken rear wing off the car, we would have been faster in a straight line. But overall, our car would have been slower on lap time. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to in qualifying and the race. Why did you double stack George and Lewis? We did that twice in the race, although the second time there was a larger gap between the two cars. and there was a reason. Both of those were under VSC conditions. A VSC and a safety car, both one and the same really for this purpose, means you gain a tremendous amount of overall race time when you complete a pit stop. To explain why, a car staying out on track is now at much more reduced speed than what it used to be. It can't travel down the straight at 325 kilometers an hour anymore. It must travel down on a predefined FI given reference lap, which is quite a bit slower in Baku. To put a number on it, it's about a 10-second race time gain or a pit stop gain that you get from it. So therefore, it's quite beneficial completing your stop under those VSC conditions. In the case of Baku, we'd already highlighted before the race started that hard tyre was very robust and could make an entire race distance if required. So taking that early VSC with both drivers and committing them to the end of the race, getting your pit stop out the way and gaining race time under your pit stop being in the VSC was the correct thing to do. And it worked out very well. You saw Leclerc doing it as well. There was an opportunity later on in the race with George. He had no position loss by again changing to a brand new fresh set of hard tyres. In the case of Lewis, there was a position loss. It was to Tsunoda. The reason why we did this, however, is that as the race was panning out relative to Gasly, Lewis wouldn't have been able to beat him. Both were on similar age tyres. We didn't have the performance offset or the ability to overtake. But what we did believe is that the hard tyre degradation was enough by that point in the race that we would have a performance offset now, a large enough one to re-overtake Tsunoda, catch up to Gasly and be able to overtake him. And that's why we took that opportunity on the second VSC. What was George's goal for this race, and what's the goal really for the remainder of the season? So start with this race. We knew that going into it, we didn't have the package to compete on pure pace with Red Bull and Ferrari. And even with certain circumstances like safety cars, it would have been difficult if we did get ahead of them to then maintain that position. So the clear goal was this. We want to be the highest position possible, assuming that they finish the race, which is 5th and 6th. And for every car that doesn't finish in front of us, we want to pick those positions up. So where George finished was absolutely what we talked about before the race started. And the same for Lewis. We recovered those positions to make sure that we were effectively 5th and 6th, and with the two Ferraris DNFing 3rd and 4th. What's clear, though, is going forward for the remainder of the season, this isn't where we want to be. This isn't where we expected to be. And we have developments in the pipeline that we believe will make steps. I don't think there's going to be one single step that suddenly resolves this, but I do believe that we're a strong enough entity and a strong enough team that we will claw back and put ourselves back in the hunt sometime this season. So therefore, to define George's goal for the remainder of the season, it's making sure that we have no mistakes. He keeps the car finishing at the end of the race, that he builds on his knowledge and his learning, and that as the car performance increases, he also has the opportunity to fight for podiums on merit and wins. The same applies to Lewis. We have two of the best drivers, if not, in my opinion, the best drivers in the sport, and they're hungry to win a race. We just have to provide them a package that can do it. What are your predictions for Montreal? Do you think it will suit the car better than Baku and Monaco did? Every track we go to, we are learning a tremendous amount about this car. And Barcelona, for all intents and purposes, was really, to us, a new car. We didn't expect perhaps to drop back as much as we did in Baku, but that provided a platform to learn from. Montreal isn't going to be substantially different to the last two races. I think we'll still have a package that isn't at the front on merit. Red Bull and Ferrari will still be the benchmark that we have to compare ourselves to. I think, though, that the large gap you saw in qualifying in Baku perhaps won't be that big in Montreal. It'll be back down from where it was. And as we go through all the races from then onwards, I'm fairly sure we'll find small steps and developments that push us back towards the front. Thank you again for all of your questions, and we'll be back in a week's time to debrief on the Montreal Grand Prix.